This second round of official visits is important for Penn State because I expect them to land at least 3 commitments out of this group.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now, there are some big names in this second group of official visits, but more importantly, legitimate candidates that could actually commit to Penn State. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. This is a recruiting episode, so I hope you would all expect the return of Brian Smith, the recruiting expert here, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, also covering Auburn football, Miami Hurricanes, Florida State with the Locked On Seminoles podcast, a comprehensive recruiting look across the nation in addition to those teams. And since it is a recruiting episode, today's episode is brought to you by the leaders in job recruiting, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire feels like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. We'll start with the names that are most likely to commit, that Penn State would be the favorite to land them. Some long shots, but still Penn State is in a good standing with the prospects. Just kind of a general overview now that we are in the second round of official visits. Well, those 3 players, Brian, that Penn State is in really good standing with, that I anticipate them to land commitments from in this class of 2025, Noah Winston, Jeff Exner, and Jabri Wallace-Coleman. And some people might be saying, well, Zach, Penn State already has 3 verbal commits from running backs. Why would they take a 4th? Oh, well, you're not going to believe this. They might end up losing a commitment from there. But that is a very sound group. Those 3 names that would be strong leans towards Penn State, Brian.
Yeah, I don't think Penn State and running back recruiting should be a concern for any Nittany Lions fan. However, it turns out they'll be fine. Like, It's legitimately that point. They're good to go there.
Yeah, exactly. And Jabri Wallace-Coleman is not a drop-off by any stretch of the imagination. This is a top 10 player in the state of Pennsylvania. I like that he's an in-state prospect. And what I'm getting at, especially just with we've had our discourse about Alvin Henderson, your buddies down now that are connected through, the Auburn media networks, Locked On Auburn too. Everyone and their brother seems very confident that Alvin Henderson will flip to Penn State. And he's not exactly saying too much. Now, he did make a post on his social media, just kind of alluding to like a TikTok, like posting a clock emoji. I know we have to read into emojis and symbols that high school prospects are posting about to kind of interpret what they're meaning. So I imagine that there's going to be a bit of news on the horizon for Alvin Henderson. And bottom line is, for Penn State's point of view, it does not look good for them to retain Alvin Henderson in the class of 2025. I would like him to be a part of this class, but if his goal is to stay at home, play at Auburn, then go for it. We already had this discussion on multiple podcasts. Why even take this commitment? But at the end of the day, Penn State did. They're probably going to lose this verbal commitment. So that's where Jabri Wallace-Coleman comes into the fold.
Yeah, I like Wallace-Coleman. He's a little bigger. Not a whole lot, but he could weigh 220 by the time he's filled out. His frame's a little larger.
Yes.
Not that there's anything wrong with anybody else that's committed to Penn State right now, running back. Any of the 3 are very, very good. But Coleman, like, that kid's put together. Georgia recruited him.
Yes, he was committed to Georgia.
That's right. So do you really worry if he ends up in your class? No. He's from Philadelphia. He's played against good high school competition. Georgia wanted him. He's 6'2", 205. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of opportunity for him. Running back, safety, linebacker. He could play all kinds of spots, but he's a running back. Penn State would do very well to get him. He's a nasty football player.
I think just the timeliness of all of this, the conversations around Alvin Henderson, the strategic official visit of a player like Wallace-Coleman. Again, when you already have 3 verbal commits at the running back position, there is no way in hell you're taking 4. So that means that somebody is going to decommit. And we've also talked about this too, that there's the potential that Penn State could end up losing 2 verbal commits in this class of 2025 with the running backs that they have. Henderson's the one. But then Keandre Barker's continuing to pick up some offers that are closer to where he's grown up. Again, he was playing his high school football career to start in Arkansas. Then he transferred to a school in Texas, and now he's over at Miami Central to finish things up. So he's been around the Southwest, Southeast region, and that's just where he's more familiar with. So it would not surprise me if Barker himself decides to stay closer to home.
That's kind of what I wonder too. Kid like that, that's, got opportunities. Obviously he sees some of those. I don't know how that kid ends up at school A, B, or C. But that could also transpire at the college level too. So if it doesn't work out there for Penn State, again, they've gotten so many options and they got such a great rep at running back. Penn State would find somebody else. They'll be fine.
Probably one of my favorite prospects that is visiting over the course of this next month, Kanoa Winston. Well, that name might sound a little familiar to Penn State fans and Penn State spectators because he is the cousin of Kevin Winston Jr., KJ Winston, who I just had a segment about being the best player on this current Penn State roster. So the older cousin of Kanoa Winston, the genes are good in the Winston family here, and they both play safety. Winston is the consensus number one prospect out of the state of Maryland. So there's some family ties here. This one makes a lot of sense. Now he's down to the legitimate three here, I would say, are Penn State, North Carolina, and Oregon. I don't know what's going on with Michigan recruiting. I have to look into that more since I'm not, obviously I'm not a Michigan insider, but I just see a lot of doom and gloom as of late for the Wolverines. I really think the legitimate top three here are Oregon and North Carolina. Penn State can fend off those two. Welcome another Winston name to the Penn State safety room.
There's some optimism for Michigan, but I don't know what they're going to be able to sell right now. They got a completely new staff. We'll see if that works out for them. Yes. But Penn State, they've always recruited DC really well, Gonzaga, etc., DeMatha, all those programs. It's hard to beat them for a kid when they get in on them early. And this is a guy they've targeted. He's a big-time player. He can really run, can play free safety, strong safety, could probably play nickel. Really good football player.
Yeah, just overall. And if he's going to mirror what his cousin is doing at Penn State, who is a surefire tackler, right? If he has even remotely some of the traits, I imagine that he's a different player, different personality, right? Even though they are related, that's going to be the big selling point here is, hey, your cousin succeeded here. You can do that as well. And you still don't have to go far away from home. That's going to be the pitch. It seems pretty seamless here. But what we know about KJ Winston, he's a surefire tackler. He's getting so much better in coverage. And I'm not saying he was bad in coverage to begin with. That's not what I'm implying here. But he basically was a middle linebacker playing safety and then progressively get better. Hey, PFF is showing that he's getting better in man. He's getting better in zone. And he has not registered a missed tackle, Brian, in his collegiate career. So if Kanoa Winston has any of those traits, he's going to be a really good football player.
I don't know if anybody's ever won a career without missing a tackle. I'd have to go back and watch that film, but yeah, even to be in that discussion is insane because so many of the players today, one-on-one, are a nightmare. Hats off to him. And he's been a player on probably the best defense in the country last year. So
yes,
you know what? If you were one of the top players on that defense, you kind of hope that the family's apple didn't fall far from the tree for the next guy. And it doesn't look like it has either.
We'll save wide receiver Jeff Exner for the upcoming segment, along with some other notable names in this second round of official visits. Penn State needs wide receivers, so Jeff Exner, come on down. What's the likelihood that he commits to the Nittany Lions? We'll discuss that next. And since this is a recruiting episode, let's talk about the leaders in job recruiting, LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you find the professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but they might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not necessarily have the time to devote to hiring. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier, quicker, and more intuitive. And that is why 2.5 million small businesses, that is right, 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So be one of them. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. We'll begin with Jeff Exner, and then we'll talk about some of the other intriguing prospects that you could describe them as long shots, but Penn State is in good standing since they do have a scheduled official visit with some of these names. And Brian, there is one on your list that really stands out to you. But Jeff Exner first. Exner, 4-star wide receiver. His case is interesting because from what I've heard in the local recruiting sources is that Exner seemed like all signs were pointing towards Virginia Tech. Brent Pry was doing really well with the recruiting. He had an official visit with them and then walked away without making a commitment. And now he's taking his official visit to Penn State this upcoming weekend. So now the signs point a little more in favor of Penn State as they almost get the last opportunity here to make a strong impression. Again, Penn State needs wide receiver. I'm surprised that they didn't land a commitment from Lex Cyrus the weekend before, but Lex Cyrus has a good relationship ongoing with South Carolina, so he's going to take that official visit, and that's where things stand there. But it's down to Penn State and Virginia Tech. Exner walked away without making a commitment to the Hokies, so I imagine with Penn State's need at wide receiver to add to Lyric Samuel and the impending verbal commitment of Lex Cyrus, that's how confident I am in that one. Penn State could have a really good wide receiver trio in just a matter of weeks here.
I think it would be a really good group. You're talking about Exner was a bigger guy. I think he could play your boundary spot, that one-on-one on the edge. You got to have an athlete there that's got some power. He fits the bill, like all the things you're looking for if you're Penn State, Exner has. And just in. I grew up in an era where Penn State battled Virginia Tech a lot in New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania. Right. They used to lose some of those. It's been a long time. They can't let that trend start back up. Penn State was, they had a thorn in their side with Virginia Tech for a long time. They've been bad for a while, but they got a good coach against. You'll probably see them around some. So it'd be good if they didn't lose out to them.
Exner is a top 10 player in the state of Maryland. Of course, I've talked about the pipeline here. He goes to McDonough High School. A lot of Penn State fans are familiar with the McDonough High School pipeline. If you're not familiar, well, that's where PJ Mustafer came from. Denai Dennis Sutton, Devon L. Lees, all these players, just Joseph Mapoye most recently, right? So Penn State continues to build this strong relationship with one of the best high school football programs in the state of Maryland, and Jeff Exner seems to be the next candidate to be a part of that list to join the Nittany Lions.
That's a program that's always had players too. Mm-hmm. Penn State should always be successful there. Always. They've always recruited it well. And again, Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey, if there's any states that Penn State has to really hit, it's those. This year they've done a good job again. These are the kind of recruitments you cannot lose, especially since receiver is, quite frankly, the number one spot on the – I don't think it's even competitive for any other position. It's receiver.
Brian, you and I talked before the show when we were going over, comparing notes and everything before we jumped into this discussion. And there is one particular prospect that is essentially flying under the radar as a whole. You look at On3, you look at 24/7, you look at Rivals, ESPN, you look at any of the main recruiting sites, and there is just not a strong read on this player. Brian, tell us more about this prospect, why Penn State should want him above all the other names that we've discussed prior here. Yes, Exner, Winston, Wallace Coleman. You like this player above those three.
They're all really good. Don't get me wrong. But the greater area in the Hampton Roads area, Virginia, has always been strong. Lawrence Taylor is from there. Ronald Curry is from there. Michael Vick, all kinds of players have come out of there. It's just been incredible. There's a kid, and I don't know what his situation is. He doesn't do very much media, but he's supposed to visit Penn State this weekend. Matthew Alton could play a lot of spots, but is a kick returner, wide receiver. They'll hand him the ball. He plays at a high school I'm not familiar with. IC Norcom. I don't know. It's in Portsmouth, Virginia, but he is shot out of a cannon. He's got only one service has got him ranked, and they have him 139th in the country, and I think that's way too low, and that's 24/7.
Wow.
But nobody else has him even in like their top 250. I'm just guessing he hasn't done many camps. Like ESPN has nothing on him, like zero. So
ESPN.
yeah, I know. It's like, okay, like you watch 4 clips of his film and this is a no-brainer. So I don't know what his situation is, but if everything's good academically and all that, the film is just lights out. I don't care what his ranking is. Sometimes kids just jump off a page and he's running by guys like they're in cement. Matthew Alton is an elite receiver / athlete. You could play him at running back, safety, whatever you want. It would not matter. I'd take that kid in a heartbeat.
Wow. So I lead off the show with 3 prospects, again, that are legitimate content. Why? Because they're most likely to commit to Penn State, well, albeit being really good, right? These are high-end 4-star prospects. But Alton, the curious case of Matthew Alton here, because he is, when you look at the consensus across the board, ESPN really brings down the ratings since they don't have a book on him. But even other than 24/7, rating him as highly as they do, which good, he's getting some respect. But you say he's still being underrated by even being a top 150 player.
Look, that area is loaded per capita. I mean, Allen Iverson's from there. Like the list is just forever.
Yes,
he's one of those kids that, like, even on that field, with every game, he's got somebody that's going to play college somewhere.
Yep.
He ran by everybody like they were standing still. He's a physical kid. He'd lower his shoulder and run over somebody. He's 200 pounds. He's over 6 foot. That is a football player that can play for anybody. He can play at Georgia. He can play anywhere. I guarantee you, if he played at a more prominent program, this would have been a kid that you would have already done a show about. Guarantee it.
Well, I'll tell you what this stems from. This is where Marcus Hagans pays off.
Right.
This is why
100%.
why you have him on staff, because that relationship, Penn State had, DC and Maryland were always good states for Penn State to, again, McDonough High School, right? So many good, talented players have come from one high school in Maryland alone. Then you have Gonzaga. Then you have DeMath, a good council, right? Penn State's recruited very well in the DC, Maryland area. Virginia, too, but not as strong as I would see. Maryland's definitely the top state of the 3, and then, District of Columbia, right? Not officially a registered state, but yes, a select area that Penn State strongly recruits. But Virginia, Penn State, good standing, but not great. And this is where Marcus Hagans pays dividends. This is why you brought him on. You took him away from his alma mater. You brought him into Happy Valley so that you could recruit players like Alton, who fly under the radar. You need great relationships to get his attention.
That's right.
And here we are. Why is Penn State? Penn State should not be in this conversation, but they are, because James Franklin was strategic with his assistant coach hirings.
This is a state that Penn State, even back in the 70s and 80s, always plucked a couple of elite players every year. They compete with Florida State, Miami, Notre Dame, Michigan, everybody. They'd get a couple of kids from there that were really, really good. And it's never been like they're going to get 7 or 8 kids out of there. But Penn State generally gets a couple really good players from Virginia. I'm telling you, this is one of those guys that should be a multi-year starter at the major Power 4 level. He's very good. So hats off to Penn State for doing their due diligence, because that's the difference in recruiting. And, no offense to any of the recruiting services either, but if he hasn't been to a lot of camps and combines, he's just flown under the radar. He's at a school nobody's going to go to. That's a football player.
And if you look at On3, they currently have him at least the most likely to land at Penn State. Again, this is Matthew Alton. Get to know the name, because he's an incredible athlete with more tape that he's able to show the scouts. That is when he will rise through the rankings, and hopefully Penn State can land that verbal commitment before SEC country catches on. But it looks like Penn State and Virginia Tech, just because, hey, by proxy, right? Virginia Tech, he's from the state of Virginia. It makes sense, but his recruitment, probably based on what you've told us, Brian, should explode here down the stretch as we move on through 2025 before the early signing period. Now, Penn State does, again, have a strong group of prospects. 12 of them at this point in time, at the time of the posting of this episode. They could add maybe 1 or 2 more, but we're going to go over the list and some of the Florida area prospects, along with some other southeastern natives We're going to discuss those players to finish up the show coming up next. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. It is winner take all in the NBA and the NHL playoffs, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can make every playoff shot count. Again, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can see the current odds. You look at the Mavericks and the Celtics over in the NBA playoffs. The Celtics open up game one as a 6.5-point favorite, minus 245 on the money line. Or if you want to bet on the NHL, game one between the Oilers and the Panthers open up as a minus 140 favorite. If you like those lines, all you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So here is the official visits list for this upcoming weekend, Friday, June 7th, going into the weekend. We already mentioned guys like Kanoa Winston, Jeff Exeter, Jabri Wallace-Coleman, and Matthew Alton specifically. Other players that will be joining them this weekend, Zayden Walker out of the state of Georgia. He is a linebacker. Phillip Bell, wide receiver out of California, interestingly enough. Edge defender Jaden Woods out of Kansas. How about that one? Jarquez Carter out of the state of Florida. He's a defensive lineman. Nolan Davenport, an offensive lineman out of the state of Ohio. Josh Johnson, a cornerback out of the state of Ohio. Amori Hills, an offensive lineman out of the state of Maryland. And Rashad Johnson out of the state of Florida. Okay, a lot of people, especially the recruiting buffs, are going to recognize the name Zayden Walker. Zayden Walker is, I don't want to say a consensus, but he is trending towards that 5-star consensus. He's already listed as a 5-star according to 24/7, but on 3 Rivals, ESPN have him as a top flight 4-star linebacker. Once again, we talked about it with Ty Jackson, that Penn State, it continues to recruit linebackers, even though they already have 3 linebacker commits. So the same thing with running back. Is what is Penn State trying to subtly tell us? That DJ McClary, who was one of the first linebackers to commit in this class of 2025, seemed like to be one of the headlining prospects, just took an official visit to Rutgers. So these recruitments of other top-tier linebackers make sense because McClary seems like a flight risk.
Every now and then you just got to cover your bases, maybe a little more than you originally might have thought. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about Zayden is arguably the best linebacker in the country. He's from Sly County in Georgia. It's just a random public school in South Central Georgia, but he could run, man. Inside linebacker, outside linebacker, edge, it doesn't even matter. He could probably play running back. He is elite. Every school in the country wants him. He's a very high priority for Kirby Smart. I don't think you really need to know a whole lot more than that, but Penn State is going to have to battle like crazy to come in and get this kid. Georgia or Miami are the schools I've heard the most on him to date. But if he's going to visit Penn State this weekend, you got a shot. I mean, Alvin Henderson committed. Nobody saw that coming either. You never know.
Yeah. No, I think those are all great points. I would probably lean towards saying that Ty Jackson would be more likely to commit to Penn State than a Zayden Walker, just because Penn State has a really good relationship built with Ty Jackson. So it's not to say that that can't be the case for Zayden Walker. But as you mentioned, I think Georgia is the strongest player here. So kudos to Penn State for getting him on campus. Hey, you never know at the end of the day. Jamonte Waller had Penn State as the school to beat. Then a lot of things changed through the recruiting process. So maybe that's the case, and Penn State's able to push through to the finish line for a player like Zayden Walker. Same thing goes with Ty Jackson. At the end of the day, if you are getting the attention of these kinds of linebackers, when you already have 3 linebacker commits, that is telling you everything you need to know about what Penn State is doing, and with Tom Allen at the helm rather than Manny Diaz. Brian, there's a couple of Florida, not as many Florida area prospects, but there's still a couple here. And the one that stands out the most is Jarquez Carter, most notably because he is a defensive lineman, and Penn State doesn't have any defensive line commits in this class.
Yeah, he's from Newberry, Florida. It's just a little bit west of Gainesville, about a half hour. And he is an upfield, get into the backfield, create havoc kind of guy. He fits what Penn State was doing under Manning. I assume the scheme isn't going to change all that much. I mean, there's no
Right.
reason to really mess with it. They were elite. Why would you screw around with it? But these are the kind of guys that change your program. Either you have inside defensive linemen that can make plays, or you just got guys. This is a kid that can make plays. You know, Florida State, Florida, a lot of different schools are looking at him. Penn State would get a coup by getting him. And I think he's a little bit underrated because he plays it like at a 2A high school. But again, you watch his film and it's pretty self-explanatory. He's the best guy on the field and he plays like it. He dominates because he should. Good kid too. Really nice kid, good grades. He wouldn't have any problems making the matriculation up north.
The interesting part of this group is that there are no prior verbal commitments in this grouping. So
That's
Penn
true.
State is trying to build, I don't want to call them new relationships, but there isn't that buffer to help out because the committed players are, James Franklin said this, recruiting staffs across the country have admitted this. The strongest recruiters are the ones that are already bought into the program, that are currently committed, because they can help sell the program past to what James Franklin, again, Andy Kotelnicki, Tom Allen, any of them, right? All the recruiters themselves, the players matter the most. So I do find it interesting that there isn't one or two verbal commits. They're kind of all saved for next weekend, and maybe that's timing, Brian. At the end of the day, maybe that's just the way that it lined up. But I do find it interesting that there's not a single verbal commitment in this group to kind of be that liaison for James Franklin and company.
It is unusual, but that doesn't mean that there won't be some that show up unofficially. That doesn't mean there won't be plenty of people there that can help. And I'm sure some of the current players will be around too. I'd imagine a few unofficial visits will take place because they got kids that live within a 4-hour radius. So that's my guess. But it is a good point, and I didn't even notice that going through the list originally. It's a bit odd because Penn State's got some commitments.
And Penn State, Philip Bell from the state of California. It's hard to give Penn State really a significant chance there, or Jaden Woods from the state of Kansas. I like those players. I think they're high caliber. Never say never. But when you do it, it's just hard for me to make an argument and say, well, I feel confident about these potential commitments, especially, they're well out of the area. But then again, there isn't that secondary voice to tell them, hey, this is a good place to commit to, even though you're like, I would want, if you have another, Penn State's recruited very local to start and then they branch out. But any of the prospects that are the furthest away from home, if you have that verbal commitment that kind of lines up there, no, Penn State doesn't have any other California prospects, but, somebody, again, that's, further out of state than Pennsylvania that can, be that bridge and say, hey, it's not so bad. This is why I made the commitment. Those things go over well. And again, maybe it's just timing because I don't think Penn State would make a recruiting mistake like that.
Yeah, you got to be careful with the kids you bring in. Getting them to commit, getting them to sign, getting them to stay. You got to remember the portal era are different things.
Mm-hmm.
So Penn State historically has recruited the Midwest and East and done well. They're obviously branching out more. But I think their staff does a good job of evaluating not only is this kid going to play for us, can he fit in our culture, but is he a guy that's going to stick around? They do it better just about anybody. They've got a good program based on that. And I think it's one of the reasons they're probably going to be a top 10 team again this year.
He is Brian Smith, the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network. Give him a follow on X. You can keep up with his Locked On show, Locked On Seminoles on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, and also see his work with the Miami Hurricanes as well as the Auburn Tigers, along with his national recruiting perspective. Brian, thanks for the time as always. And we're going to do this in just another week's time, as the next weekend of visits is absolutely loaded and a lot of verbal commitments as well. So exciting conversations are on the horizon.
Thank you very much.
And once again, thanks so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Be a part of the conversation down in the comments section. Let me know your thoughts on Penn State recruiting and where you think the Nittany Lions stand for the class of 2025. If you did enjoy this discussion, leave a like on the episode, share it with friends and family. And if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app.